to another edition of Ljubljana Talks, which we are recording live at IBTM 2024. And with Gorazd, we have another great conversation ahead of us with a fantastic guest, guy Bigwood, with the coolest title in the industry, the Chief Changemaker of GDS Movement. Mr. Changemaker, could you elaborate on that?
I thought you were going to say the coolest surname.
That too.
People say, is that really your surname? Oh, yeah. Changemaker. I think that was my... the team gave me that because the team is always entitled changemakers. That's what their roles is, because that's what we have to do. Right? We have to kind of help destinations and organizations accelerate change. And so out of that, someone said one day, like, you must be the chief change maker, right? So that's how it started.
What about movement? Can you elaborate also that? Why you believe that you created a movement, GDS movement?
There's a bit of a story there. As you know, I worked for 20-something years in sustainability. And for 15 of those years, I was with MCI. So I was a managing director, but I became the sustainability director and started up the whole sustainability program.
Ahead of fashion, I would say.
Well, a long time. 2004 is when we started. And so, and 2018, I took a year off and I went cycling around the world. And in that year, everywhere I went, I was really confronted with climate change. And it made me stop and think about a lot of the work we're doing around sustainability is not making any difference, and trying to sustain the problems that got us into this mess is not going to fix it. And so I came back from that and really thought we need to shift to a different way, to a regenerative mindset where we're regenerating and fixing and changing the systemic problems and issues. And for that, we need a movement. So that's why we came back and I launched the GDS Movement in 2019. And that's the journey I've been on since.
Interesting. I want to ask you directly why the northern parts, countries from Northern Europe are so much better than countries from the south. This is a classical dilemma, south and north and so on. Is it true or it's not true?
I think, if you look at the top 5 out of the GDS index, they're Scandinavians. It used to be the top 15. Now we have Singapore at number 7, we have Belfast at number 9, we have Bordeaux, I think it's number 6 or number 8 or something. So yes, the Nordics are very, very good at this. They've been at it longer than everyone, firstly. 2, we've been working with them since 2008. So there's a kind of, practice makes perfect. So there's a lot of that. However, things are changing. I've just spent the last month in Asia. I think there's a lot to learn from places like Dubai and Singapore. And there's still a little bit of, I would call it sustainability colonialism. We think our European way is the best way of doing things. And I'm really challenging.
It's a very good
challenging
point.
Some of that at the moment. And I'm challenging my own arrogance, actually.
Is Europe still first?
Definitely at the moment, but it won't be. I mean, look, Singapore went from whatever they were, 50-something to number 7 in the index, right? But what they're working on is mind-blowing. And the speed of change in places that, in our mind, are not so democratic, the speed of change is phenomenal.
What kind of products or what kind of programs and changes excite you? What would be the ones that you go, wow, that is so innovative, that's so great, and it will really contribute?
So I'll share one that I was highly critical about, and so that's Turkey, right? So Turkey didn't have a sustainability program, and they decided to start on a program. So there's kind of a new ministry was set up to do development, TGA. And they looked at hotels and said, we don't have certified hotels. How are we going to move that forward? So they came up with their own program, and they looked at kind of 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. So level 1 was they just wanted to get hotels doing kind of 10 basic things, a few basic things. And so they rolled that out. A lot of the experts around the world said, this is crap, this is no good, this is not what sustainability is all about. but they now have 20,000 hotels doing that. By the end of 2025, they will have 40,000 hotels that have gone through that and are now going into full GSTC level certification. To a shift from 0 to 40,000 in 3 or 4 years. That's mind-blowing. And it wasn't as good as we'd expect in Europe. We can criticize, but they got them on the bus. And once you're on your bus, you can move them into the right seats. And so hats off to them and respect. And yeah, I've changed my opinion of programs like that.
Interesting. Well, we know how to measure the carbon footprint of ourselves, of
Yep.
companies, of
Yep.
products. That's
Yep.
clear. We have a GHG protocol, but your invention is actually innovation too, to measure the destination footprint, or I don't know,
Yeah.
legacy and impact. Can you explain a little bit more? How you do that? So that everybody will understand this.
Yeah, so I mean, whether you're measuring an event or a destination, it kind of goes through the same basic things. What's your travel? What do you get from the emissions from the built environment, from the products that we buy and the food we buy and serve. So there's a way to do that. There's different approaches. Until now, a lot of approaches what we call in-out or economic modeling.
Okay.
So basically, if you know an economic turnover, you can kind of estimate how many emissions are per dollar spent in the hotel. And over the years, that's getting better and more accurate. So we can do one type of modeling like that. And a few places around the world have done that. Now, in the last couple of years, we're starting to get better. How do we go out and get the data from the hotels? We can pull data now from the airlines. There's consolidators that bring that in for us. There's some other classic, we can take data from the credit card companies. So we're able to bring in big data now and do much more reliable estimations of carbon footprint. There's still very few people doing that well. There's still very few people doing it. So there's a big shift at destination level, and even at an event level, we've got to shift that too.
What is your opinion about compensation? So at the end of the process, if we measure everything precisely, then we know the carbon footprint, but then we have several options to measure also the regenerative parts or to simply compensate. What is your feeling about it? Are you for compensations or against? Or
I'm for correct compensation, but there's an approach, right? Number one is about reduction. We have to reduce. That's what we're trying to do, and that's where the focus should be on that. Compensation is for the bit that you can't reduce, okay? And it's going to start bigger, and over the years it will get smaller. And that, if done right, is actually a good economic leverage, because we're going to pay a lot today to compensate, but later when we're more at net zero and we've reduced 90% of emissions, that 10% small. So it's a cost basis. There are different approaches to compensation, and this is what not everyone understands, right? You have a reduction, you have an avoidance, and you have an elimination. Okay, so if we plant trees, we can actually start to reduce because we're absorbing some of the carbon, okay? We can invest in things such as stoves, efficient cooking stoves. So parts of Africa are having to cut down trees to go and cook. So by giving more efficient stoves, they use less wood, which means has many secondary benefits. So normally who goes and cuts down the wood? The women. So women have to travel less, or children. So women and children can be in work more, can be focusing on other things. So you've got that. But then, so you got those, and those benefits may not happen for many years. They're going to happen a little bit per year. So you don't actually, when you compensate, in general, take the emissions out of the air today. The only way we're going to get to net zero is to eliminate emissions. So you need better structured elimination offsets. And so some of that can be good forestry, but a lot of that is going to be technology that is to come, direct carbon capture. New technology today that actually sucks out of the air and turns into rock or stone carbon emissions. It's expensive. It's maybe 200 euros a ton today, but that will get cheaper and cheaper, and we have to have that.
You know, there's a very interesting technology that is proposed by a Slovenian biologist, Irena Fonda, and that is that we should be just creating more spaces where oysters could grow, because oysters actually suck carbon to create their shells, and at the same time as they grow, they filter the water. So if you put those, and once they are captured, they don't disperse. They stay. The carbon stays captured for a long time, and it costs nothing basically. So that's a provocative.
But it's a
thought.
really good one, because what has happened because of this polemic around carbon offsetting, I remember a small percentage, mainly around forestry projects, were not delivering the results. Okay. And The Guardian and others have focused on that correctly, but they made it look like all offsetting projects are bad. None of ours have been affected, and we do hundreds of thousands of tons for clients every year. None of those have been that. But what's happened is it's stopped millions of euros, or perhaps billions of euros, going into nature regeneration projects. Because a good offset project always has multiple benefits, community and nature impact, not just CO2. And so that really is it's a crime for me. So that's why we've got to get back and really looking at proper offsets.
The GDS index, we've been involved with it for quite a few years in Ljubljana. We've seen it change considerably. It's become much more complex. It goes much deeper. It's painstakingly hard at times. So it's a double question. The first question is, how will you continue? What kind of elements are you integrating in the future? And the second question is, because if I'm not mistaken, Helsinki got 89 out of 100. So there must be space for improvement, right?
And really, it's such an interesting dynamic in that we're in a place now that's, on one side, we've got a lot of cities, regions, countries that haven't started. Then on the other side, we've got places such as Helsinki that are highly advanced. And so we've got products such as the GDS index. They're too difficult for some and need to be adapted, evolved to push others. I think the one good thing the index has done over the years, it's not one of these certifications that's updated every 8 years. As you know, every year it goes through a process and it's updated, which is a pain in the backside for you, because, oh God, we've got to do more. But what we've seen is that has driven change. And the data shows us, and it's mind-blowing. So on one side, we've got to evolve the product to do more. And because of the Green Claims Directive and legislation, we will have to, have more of a path to drive people to certification on one side. And that's always what we've been about. But that needs to be a simpler path. And I explain that a bit more in the thing. But on the other side, we actually have to come up with a simpler product to get Asia, LATAM, the US destinations on board.
But I just learned from your colleague Jan that she appreciated the process of collecting the data is not so simple, because she believes that because of that it's transformative. So just to confirm, so simplification probably it's necessary, but it's also not so transformative. I don't know if I'm right.
No, and you get these two things. Oh, it's too complex, too much. Oh no, but we need it really rigorous. We need it really tough. And which way is it going to go?
Yeah, exactly. So do you believe that we need some force like legislation or whatsoever to change, or it's in the nature of people, or what?
It's already here.
I know. Yes.
We've got legislation, and it's just going to come out more. You know that phrase in the US innovates, Asia copies. What do we do in Europe? We regulate.
Yes.
So we've got legislations around, reporting of sustainability and carbon emissions. We've got new legislation coming in about waste. We've got legislation about deforestation, and
about
of course
greenwashing too.
We've got the Green Claims Directive, a series of legislation that came out in March. We have new legislation in September 2026, and then we have the final reclaims coming out 27, 28 time when that's finally ratified. So It is a game changer.
It is, yeah.
And again, there's some good parts and there's some bad parts.
We are in the middle of the COP29, named by Copenhagen, as I learned yesterday.
Yeah.
So what do you think about it? Is such an event necessary, or it's now already in the hands of oil lobby, or what is your opinion about it?
So
And your feelings about it too, personal
I've
feelings.
organised multiple of this as a PCO. I've organised multiple things that I've done a lot of consulting on the COPs, so I know them very well. Probably why I don't go to them anymore. I think there's two sides. The COPs have driven phenomenal progress, and people kind of look at the progress as just as the treaty, and Paris is a good element, and maybe they're not delivering enough on that side. But on the other side, the COPs are catalysts for thousands of other treaties, corporate treaties, ones in the finance industry, in the bank industry, in the airline industry. This week you'll start to see lots of little initiatives be launched, and often that's the real catalyst. So I believe in the COP. It's the only instrument that exists, but the actual negotiation on the treaty needs to be fundamentally updated. I do think oil and gas should be at the table because we're trying to get them to change. And if we don't have them at the table, how can we negotiate? But we can't let them control things. And we need to break it up from bigger to smaller, more regular negotiation talks. So if you talk to people like Christiana Figueres, who pioneered the framework for Paris and people like that, or Al Gore, Al has a very clear idea with Christiana of what needs to happen. I just really hope that happens in the next few years.
There's really been a lot of change in the last years. I mean, if nothing else, when we are sitting here at IBTM, it is one of the largest meetings industry events. We know it creates business.
Yeah.
We know it changed in itself.
Yeah.
We see it with trade shows and how we create events and all that. When we look at the convention bureaus, now it's a standard that you have a sustainability manager. Our Alenka Sorshak that does it for us. That is a relatively new role, and she has to figure it out. And as we kind of touched upon at the beginning, Europe is first in many of these things. How do you see the development of the industry, the meetings industry? How do you see it adapt to climate change? How do you see it put into consideration that we have to do certain things? Are there things that excite you, worry you?
So there's one word that jumps to mind as I was listening to you there, and it's exponential. Exponential. We're going to have an exponential rise of climate disasters, problems, chaos. Just look what happened in Valencia a couple of weeks ago. We better get used to that, right? So a lot of my work now is helping destinations plan how to deal with that. One of the questions we had in the GDS index that was always criticised is, do you have a crisis plan? And that's not our job, that's the city's job. And we had so much kickback on that. Now we're working a lot on crisis plans for destinations. So there's exponential crap that's going to come down. Then on this side, exponential, the good stuff, the solutions. Look at the rise of renewable energy. 3 times growth over the last 10 years. China's installed more renewables than the rest of the world put together. Look at the rise of electric. Look at the rise of green buildings. Look at the rise of sustainable materials. And that's just going to exponentially grow. So we got these two worlds. And so for me, it creates two things. Outrage that we're going too bloody slow. The world's falling apart and we're still having discussions. And we're purpose washing, we're greenwashing to ourselves, that it's still good enough to kind of fly everyone around the world and do needless crap meetings. I'm being deliberately outrageous here, right? But then on the other side, I'm incredibly optimistic that we can work our way through this, right? But how do we accelerate electrification? How do we accelerate alternative fuels such as SAF? How do we change habits and behaviors? And there's many people in this room here who are doing some great work, but we have to go 5 times faster.
Well, coming back to GDS index, what is the biggest challenge for your destinations? What is the problem, which is, I would say, really the biggest challenge for all of them? I would say if you ask AI in your system what will come out, as a minus and what is a plus, let's say so.
I think different things. There's a step change when someone gets a sustainability manager, right? It was less than 5% when we started in 2016. And I can't remember now, but it's 60-70% of the destinations are there. So there's a big change. And so what we've seen is kind of these 3 levels. When you start a program, I've just come from Luxembourg, right? They've just come onto the index and they're at level 1, right? They don't have anything really in the bureau, in the tourism thing. So they will start a basic plan, they will do the assessment, they know where they are, there starts a few initiatives. And there'll be a voluntary person, like Alenka was in the past. Then you go to step 2, which I call a kind of integrated step. So then you'll start to there will be a full-time or some percentage of the time will be dedicated to sustainability. So there'll be a resource. They will start, more concise actions, probably in more silos, maybe like a sustainability plan. Then after a few more years, you'll go to embedded, I call it, which is where there is a VP of sustainability that's on the board, on the management team. It's highly embedded. Every department, from finance to HR to sales, has sustainability integrated. The work is shared out, and it's a very big difference in the business model. So you see these 3 steps. So there's challenges at each of those steps. And so I've seen Ljubljana move to those 3 steps. I've seen Copenhagen go, and I see a lot of places still at 1, struggling to 2. So there's a kind of evolution of that.
This was an amazing talk. I must say it took us a while to get you on, but I'm pretty sure it's not the last time. Before we finish, because we've come to the end of our time, we usually finish off with a couple of short questions.
Okay.
And you can answer them quickly or slow or more elaborate. Apple or pineapple?
Pineapple.
Beach or city?
Peach?
Beach or city?
Mountains.
Mountains, okay. Beer or wine?
Both.
Okay.
Guy Bigwood, thank you very much for being a part of Ljubljana Talks.
Thank you for inviting me, guys.
Thank you and keep tuned.
Cheers.